I know that this session is going to be so compelling that the only reason you're going to get on your phones is to, do something on social media using the hashtag Skoll.org, and otherwise you're going to be totally with us, because you're not just kind of passive people here. We're going to come to you actually radically before we hear significant contributions from the panelists. So just be prepared that this is you can't just relax and chill and do your email, Because, the fact that you have chosen to come here, and for the people who are watching on live stream, shows that you equally place importance at this, on this incredibly significant topic, because it just couldn't feel more meaningful, more prescient, and more urgent right now in societies right across the globe. And I heard a phrase this week at a session in this very room, actually, which said that the world evolves at the speed of trust. And Edwin Macharia said it, the world evolves at the speed of trust. And I thought that was so beautiful, and it really inspired me as a phrase. And trust, of course, is so critical at bridging and creating belonging and dignity. So in the next 75 minutes, you'll hear solutions about establishing trust across this continuum. So we're talking from polarization all the way to more significant real-life conflict. And what's unleashed by bringing unlikely allies together, even if they're, for example, former warriors on different sides, or if they still disagree. And we'll hear from the panelists about their work in fractured societies, and also just the need to acknowledge the scale of the challenge right now. And if we didn't do that, we wouldn't be real. And it's so important that this discussion is real and authentic. So I'm going to just turn to each of you panelists to ask you to describe, and I thought it would be really beautiful at the beginning just to have a moment to describe what belonging can really feel like. So I'm going to introduce you and then ask you in 45 seconds or less, and we'll keep to the clock, a moment, a time, a place where you felt you really belonged, when your full dignity was respected, and just to say what that felt like. So first of all, to you, Catalina Duque, you're a serial entrepreneur from Medellin, Colombia. You now run Fundación Mi Sangre, and according to LinkedIn, the foundation has impacted the lives of over 2 million Colombians, which is pretty impressive, don't you think? Just give her a round of applause for that. You've been equipping the participants with life skills, leadership, and entrepreneurial skills so that they can co-create positive changes in their communities and beyond. And arts and nature are also central to your programs. And personally, you're an Ashoka leader, a young global leader at the World Economic Forum, just to name 2 of your multiple accolades. So tell us, Catalina, a time or place where you really felt you belonged.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you, everyone, for being here. Well, I could think of many moments with family and in nature, but somehow a paradoxical story comes to mind. And it was when I was about 17, 18 years old, I decided to do an internship in a program called Football for Peace in a very dangerous neighborhood in Medellin, when it was the most dangerous city in the world. And I'll never forget how a young guy who looked like a gang member looked into my eye, came directly straight, put his hand here in my shoulder and told me, "Don't worry, Blondie, I'm as afraid of going to your neighborhood as you are of coming to mine." I guess I felt belonging because he was able to see my fears and to embrace them, and I was able to experience his, and we both experienced shared humanity. And somehow my presence, even in fear, I felt could become a bridge. I knew from that moment on that I wanted to dedicate my life to connect apparently opposing worlds.
That's really beautiful, moving story. Thank you for sharing that. Heela Yoon, let me turn to you. You're the founder and executive director of Afghan Youth Ambassadors for Peace Organization, a grassroots NGO dedicated to mental health, peace building, and climate action. You've spearheaded programs to empower Afghan girls, and in fact, you're now advising the UK government on this. Is that correct? And you're originally from Afghanistan, and now you're working here in England, in the UK. And can you, Heela, describe a place where you felt you truly belonged?
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for coming. Like Catalina said, there are just too many places and times, but I think one time I would say is that when we celebrated Eid and after Ramadan, and when we just sitting together with me and my family member, that's when I felt really safe and grounded. But just hearing the stories of my mom and grandmother, they both survived civil war in Afghanistan, and my mom was shot and left in the basement, and she survived. And just during that time, that hearing the story of their resilience and what I have been through, at the same time what my grandmother and mother has been through, but then celebrating it at the same time in that celebration of like that happiness that we had during Eid, that one I felt really grounded and happy, because that resilience of intergenerational trauma, intergenerational resilience in my family made me feel like I really belonged in that place. And the two words I would describe it is grounded and safe in that time and that place.
That's so beautiful. So despite the pain that your family has witnessed and experienced firsthand, it is also a source of strength for you.
Exactly, and resilience.
And resilience. Yeah. And tell me, what moved you first to take on this peace-building work?
I would say with the story, I mean, there are many reasons, like the story of my families and the community and also the country I've been. But one of the stories that always stuck with me during work was when we were working in Afghanistan, we met one of the women. She was around in her mid-50s, and she told us one of the stories that she had two sons that she lost both in the war. One of the sons joined the army, and the second son joined the militia group. They both killed each other during war. And the same imam who did azan and whisper in their ears when they were born, it was the same imam who buried them and led their funeral. They are now both buried next to each other. And that story always reminded me that war was never an option for anything, and peace is something that we need. And though both those sons who were killed were closer to my age, to be honest, they were both in their 20s, and that story really like stuck with me, is that like there are millions of stories like that in Afghanistan, and we need to amplify those through our work and the organization that we're working in.
That's fantastic. Those sort of crossing divides, even within one single family, and the tragedy of that. Thank you so much, Heela. Mathieu Lefevre, you're co-founder and CEO of More in Common, which is well known to people here in the Skoll community, working now not just across Europe, but in the US and in Brazil, researching forces that drive us apart and testing solutions that bring us together. And you truly work in a non-partisan way. And I've done a lot of collaborations in my role in the BBC and subsequently, and I can really vouch for that in some very tricky, challenging circumstances. But you personally have a history of peacekeeping in Afghanistan, in Lebanon, and even peacekeeping in the UN Security Council in New York, which might have been the hardest place of all. But you've also advised political campaigns in France and in the US, and I won't ask who for. Can you, Mathieu, describe a place where you truly felt as if you belonged?
Thanks very much, Emily, and thank you for the invitation to take part. I fear that my story is much more mundane, but as you said, I lived in many parts of the world, like many people in this room. We've traveled a lot, and the place where I feel at home is a French bakery. I'm French. I grew up in France. My mom is American, hence my slightly American accent, but when I return back home after a long trip, I go to a bakery near my hometown, and if you can just, I'm sure there's a smell that reminds you of home. Proust writes about this famously, but like the smell of a French bakery, just the smell of the butter, the flour, all the hard work that goes into it immediately projects me to a place. So sometimes it's not, a large experience of belonging. Sometimes it's just a smell can transport you to a place where you feel home and you belong. And I'm sure that everyone has an example here of a smell that takes them to that place.
Yeah, that is so beautiful. In fact, when I do Crossing Divides deep listening work, and I get people, first of all, to practice with a very sort of simple way to have that meaningful conversation in some conflict situations, I get them to ask each other, what food reminds you of home? Because that brings people very deep, and they're able to connect at a much more fundamental level. So that's a beautiful example. Thank you so much, Mathieu. And rather radically, I want to turn to you guys now, because as I said, you've given up a lot to come here this morning, and I want to make sure that we deliver for you. So can I ask any of you who want to say, like, what burning questions do you want to make sure that we guys address during this 1 hour, 5 minutes that we have left to talk today? This is not an opportunity to showcase your brilliant social enterprise. It's just, just hearing those really important questions that otherwise you'll leave and you'll think, bloody hell, why the hell didn't they talk about this burning question? Has anybody got anything they wanna make sure that we talk? There's a lady in the back there.
Good morning. Is it working? Yes. Nasser Ismail. The thing that is burning is probably the breakfast that I had with my friend, but it's the breaking part. So, like, I think this is the outcome. This is the world we want to be in. I don't know if I'll ever see bridging, belonging, and dignity for all, but like we're in breaking. So I really hope that we start from that perspective before we fall in love with the outcome that many of us may not live to see. Sorry, that's so inspiring for Friday morning.
But can I just clarify to make sure I understand? Is it that you want to acknowledge, can we have her microphone? You want to make sure that we're realistic and not be too sort of pie in the sky?
That we're grounded in where we are, which is many, many levels of breaking, and that we're not, that we don't move towards this, which hasn't quite happened for everyone equally, which is the belonging and the beautiful outcome.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other thoughts? There's a lady and then a lady behind her over here. And just do introduce yourself briefly.
Thank you. I'm Gabi Arenas from Catalyst Now. When I read the title of the session, it struck me the word dignity, because we have been speaking with a lot of our members in the last months about how some initiatives from the social sector are created in a way that break the dignity of people, like refugee camps, for example. So I would love to hear from you how we can change those structures and those systems that we have within our own system and our way of doing things to really care all the time for the dignity of people.
Thank you very much for making sure we include and centre on the importance of dignity. And there's a lady behind you.
Thank you. Priya from Antarang. I think Gabriela sort of put it very beautifully. My question, or what I'd like addressed, is also how do you translate the dignity of one section of population to mean the same thing for another section of population? How do you ensure dignity is understood in the same way by everyone?
That's really, really good. And one final from this lady over here. It's great having all these women speaking out, by the way.
Jessica, also with BMW Foundation, and my question, building on all of them, is on the systemic level, institutional, because belonging and bridging and also being aware of breaking is a spiritual practice, but it's also a very practical practice in terms of norms and so on. So my question is, political parties, parliaments, governments, institutions, how can we make systemic change there in the speed that we need right now with what is at stake?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, bear that. And although there'll be time for questions at the end, if any moment you have like a burning question or very brilliant and brief thought that you want to contribute, please put your hand up. And just, it's a small, lovely, perfectly formed group here, and we've got space enough. So please feel free to do that, because it's really an inclusive. I know all of you could be really here on this panel. So that would be fantastic. So I wanted to really start by looking at a little bit of data. And I know, Mathieu, with your work at More in Common, you do a lot of scanning what actually has happened, about being realistic about the breaking, as somebody was back there was saying. How far apart are we really?
Thanks very much, Emily. I want to pick up on the very helpful challenge about breaking and bridging. I think one of my sort of philosophies is that we shouldn't fall into sort of fake binaries. So I think it's not just or we're breaking or we're bridging, but you're totally right that we have to acknowledge that right now for a lot of people it feels like there's more breaking than bridging. However, to answer your question, Emily, I think that sort of my operating assumption, but I have lots of data to prove it, is that we're not actually as divided as it seems. Now, that's not to say that there is no breaking going on, not at all. Both of those things can be true at the same time. But certainly, the picture that we get from we poll hundreds of thousands of people in lots of countries, so I have lots of data to share with you if you're interested. But basically, what the data says is that we are much less divided than you would think if you read the news or social media and so on. And that is very simple, but it's also very true and very important to remind ourselves of that. In a way, I'm always so struck when we do research that we are much better than our politicians, than our social media, than news entrepreneurs and conflict entrepreneurs, etc. And one framework which I wanted to share very briefly today, which might be helpful to sort of ground our conversation, and it's obviously this is theory, more important stuff is the things that Catalina and Heela will, and many of you will share about realities. But one framework that I think might be helpful to our conversation is something that we've done, which is called the perception gap. So bear with me for a second while I explain, and maybe it will resonate with you. So the perception gap is essentially the gap between what we imagine an opposing party believes about any issue and the reality of what they believe. Okay, so I'll say that again. So it's the gap between what we imagine an opposing party believes and the reality of what they believe. I'll share two quick examples. They're both from the US because we've done most of this work in the US, and you can find out all about it on More&Com's website, or we even have a website called perceptiongap.us. You can read all about it. So I'll just share two examples so that people walk away with it and maybe resonates with you and you have examples. So the first one is that we asked Republicans and Democrats, so that's just one example of a divide. There could be many others. We asked them the question, is it important that every American student learn about slavery and segregation? So we asked them the question and they say, I agree, disagree, right? Okay. Democrats think that 32% of Republicans agree with the statement, yes, it is important for every American to learn about slavery, right? Democrats think that only 32%, a third of Republicans, agree with that statement. The reality, when you ask Republicans, is 83%. So there is a massive gap between what Democrats think, Republicans think, and what Republicans actually think. It's a gap of 50% between 32% and 83%. That is what we call the perception gap. Okay, I'll give you another very quick example. We asked the question, do you agree or disagree with the statement, most police are bad people? Republicans think that only 48% of Democrats disagree with that statement, but the reality is 85% of Democrats disagree with that statement. So you see on both sides, Democrats and Republicans, that there's a massive perception gap. And the reason I wanted to share this framework is that what I really like about the perception gap is it doesn't put the onus of responsibility for breaking or for divisions on the other side. It puts it on you. Like, what are my perception gaps? How am I misunderstanding people on the other side? And we did a lot of research, which I won't share now, about why people have perception gaps. Is it about their news consumption, their education experiences, etc.? I won't share that with you today, but I think what's interesting and relates to our conversation, Emily, is like, what can we do to reduce our perception gaps? What can you do? What are the perception gaps that you're falling victim to and why? So it's sort of empowering as a framework, I think.
I mean, what an impressive question. And it can be so easy to feel smug in a forum like this and blame the other for everything that's going wrong. And I think hopefully all of us can think about just, during the course of this discussion and today, what are my perception gaps? I think that's a really beautiful invitation for all of us. And thank you very much for that sort of context and that setting. So I'm going to turn to the panelists and really to focus on what's working. And I've asked them not just to tell nice, beautiful stories of some fantastic, work happening in one small place, but also to try and pull out the lessons which might be valuable for other people in other contexts. And then I'll also turn to the floor if anybody else has got brilliant and brief thoughts that they want to contribute of something, a brilliant lesson that they didn't know, but they came to learn and understand, which has been really, really helpful for them. And Catalina, I wanted to turn to you, and we're talking about, in a way, conflict coming from polarization to real war, and you come from Colombia, a country which, of course, has experienced extraordinary amount of violence, and it seemed almost endemic for many, many years. And you've been working at the grassroots. Can you tell us what you have found that's really working from your own work?
Sure. Well, very briefly, we've been working for 18 years unlocking people's potential to contribute to peace building. And we started working especially with young victims at the beginning, giving them the tools to create change initiatives. But we rapidly saw the need to involve different young people who had been even perpetrators or from very different socioeconomic backgrounds. And for the past 7 years, we've been working with very diverse actors, not only with young people, but solving solutions in specific areas. And I think what we're seeing and the lessons that we've learned from this is first, the invitation is not necessarily to dialogue or to breach per se, but to create something, to envision, to align towards a shared vision. So we identify a particular problem that invites others, and we call, for example, around gender-based violence, victims, the church, former perpetrators, moto taxis, etc., to develop capacity. So really aligning towards a shared goal is really important. Otherwise, I don't know how we would be able to invite people to talk. Human connection. Human connection beyond professional labels. I think this is really important when we allow time to share stories, emotions, people. That generates empathy. And when you feel heard and seen, your heart opens as well. And that allows you to see other people beyond the labels that we have, not only as a professional, but as a perpetrator or whatever role you have in society. So human connection beyond labels, beyond professional labels or other labels is really important. Seeing these experiences as learning experiences is critical as well. And that's another incentive why people join these journeys that we create along 9 months, sometimes even a year. And some of them remain as learning ecosystems that create solutions. Learning about what? Learning about the root causes of our problems, like understanding the root causes through different eyes and sharing the different perspective is so enriching, like their biases and their perceptions grow, like why do young people join gangs? Like it's not necessary.
And anything has changed you? What did you learn in any of those situations which shocked or surprised you?
Oh, absolutely. Like, for example, I had a really strong of course, rejection to paramilitaries who fought guerrillas in and to guerrillas as well, but discovering why they had joined, because they had been victims themselves. They saw their parents being killed, so it was a personal need to respond to that pain. It really shifted. It allowed me to see their own pains and the stories behind. So yeah, empathy grows. I also think it's an opportunity to heal together, because 60 years of conflict, of course, we're all in collective trauma. And if we don't recognize, so having these conversations with open hearts, listening to each other, we've had beautiful moments when we talk about deeply listening around what is the thing that pains you more about Colombia. And we listen to the stories, and we've all faced the same stories in a different way, but we're all victims and somehow perpetrators in a way of, not necessarily violent perpetrators, but yeah, rejection, etc. And I think also, a thing that has shifted a lot in these processes is working around, we usually get together to work around what's missing, but what happens if we work around with what's possible? So mapping the potential, looking what we have in the room, even in the most disadvantaged young people with very little education, they're the ones who better know the community. They are the most resilient, creative, they're really connected. So the knowledge that there's there, and also with the government, with the private sector, who at the beginning, they're there and they're like, what am I doing here? I have nothing to do with youth violence. But they recognize, for example, we work with a big health insurance company who realized that through their services, they could detect mental health issues and the risks that young people were facing.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So many lessons there from your personal experience. It feels really moving for you and for the people who participated in it. And Heela, I know you've worked in a number of Afghan provinces and you bring people together for 3 days of intensive work. Is that right? Tell us more about it.
So when we started work in Afghanistan, I was quite young as well, to be honest, when I started this organization, and I was like, yes, we're working in peace building. So when we went to the provinces, eastern provinces, that's where I'm from, we consulted with young people, young women, young men, and we were like, oh, you know, there is this big UN resolution, UN different conferences are happening, summit are happening, everyone is talking about peace and everything, and their face was completely blank. They were like, why would I give any, I don't consider this at all, like what is this resolution? It's not impacting our lives on the ground. My family is still being killed. There's lack of, there's unemployment. I don't have money. They're like, I need to feed my family. So when we saw this thing, like, okay, what is not working in countries like Afghanistan? Like, we talk about UN resolution, about peace building, the amount of investment and humanitarian aid that went to Afghanistan, but we were not seeing any progress. So what we decided is like, why don't we tap into what is most common between our culture in Afghanistan and all these communities that are divided? 2 things, faith and culture. We tapped onto that. So we conducted 3 days of peace building dialogues, and we brought all the stakeholders, not just the young people, the religious leaders, the tribal leaders, victims of violence as well. So we sit there. At the beginning, we faced a lot of resistance. Nobody would even look at each other. You're like, you did this, I did this. Like, it was just like me versus them type of mindset at the beginning. So we were like, okay, how do we bring these people so they can talk to each other? We use Islamic reasoning to bring them together. We give Islamic reasoning and faith reasoning. And you know what? 99% of Afghans are Muslim. You know what Prophet Muhammad did when there was conflict? He did this. Do you know what Khadija did, Prophet's wife? She did this. And then the second thing was culture. Afghans are very hospitable people, so we tapped onto hospitality. That's like a main rooted culture in Afghanistan. We said, why don't you all cook something? Like when Mathieu said French bakery, something that makes you belong to it. It was the same in Afghanistan. We were like, why don't you cook qabli? Why don't you cook this? Every community brings something that makes them belong. And that kind of built that atmosphere of trust in that community during that peace building dialogues. Mm-hmm. And everyone explained what they've been through, why they're not listening to each other. Fear comes when there is mistrust and no safety. Our main purpose was to provide them a space of safety so they can be vulnerable. And to be honest, there's still resistance, especially there's generational resistance as well. Like the older generation were more resistant towards opening up. They were skeptic. It's like, you're just an NGO coming from a Western country, like doing this and this. And we're like, okay, one thing which was really important during that consultation was we let the community dialogues. We give them the ownership. We were just facilitators and enablers, so I knew what my role was. And one thing I've learned as well during these 3 days of consultation is like, there is no acknowledgement of the political grief and trauma these communities been through. Because Afghanistan has been in war since the 50s, so there's decades of war. Everyone been through so many traumas, so much political grief, and there was never any acknowledgement. We became very passive-aggressive. Afghanistan was considered a lost country. We're like, oh, these things happen in countries like this. And when we sit there and talked about it and listened to them, that's when we know like the main thing is that there was no acknowledgement how many people have lost their life, communities. And this is one way what we have done and learned that like, okay, this is how we can build the bridge and remove these divides that exist. But there's a long way for this. Like we need to do this collectively in every community. Tab on to what is the most important in the community. Don't just reinforce what you have learned in another country and just force the same template in Afghanistan. And that was really important for us. Understand the political grief.
Thank you. And that also picks up the point that you were making about acknowledging what's broken before we're ready to move forward and discuss. And if you just, skim over it, people won't feel it. I don't know, Mathieu, if you've got a particular, because you do so much work spanning so many parts, but if you've got any particular story you want to bring.
No, I will bring a very short story, but I really wanted to say that both of those real world applications are really matter, and there's common themes that appear. Doing something together. I mean, theory, there's something called social contact theory, which was partly developed here at Oxford University, which basically says it's much better to do something together than to talk about something together. Like do anything, music, food, so that's a through line. A story that I'll share very briefly is a sort of meta story. But before I do that, I really want to recognize that there's a lot of people in this room who do a lot of this work. And Skoll does a great job. Thank you, Skoll, for bringing together a lot of people who do bridging work. And I mean, I know we work with like 5 or 10 organizations in this room, and that's really important. So thank you, Skoll, for doing that. A story is just a tiny anecdote. In our work, we do focus groups. So we do a lot every couple of days. A focus group, for those of you who've never seen one or participated in one, basically you get 8 or 10 people together for 2 hours to talk about a specific topic. You can recruit a particular group, women, men, young people vote this way and that way. Anyway, and the standard practice is that you pay people to join a focus group. It's about $40 in the US to pay. You pay people, so it's not a lot of money in the US for a couple of hours. Every week or every couple of weeks, we have a version of the story I'm about to share happen, which is that at the end of 2 hours of talking about the state of the United States or France or Poland or Brazil, etc., somebody, usually a woman, says, "This was so great. Thank you so much. We spent 2 hours talking about our country. We didn't yell at each other. I didn't know any of these people. Thank you so much. And could I please come back next week and you don't need to pay me?" And I just think it's so moving because it shows that there's just such a yearning to connect, to talk. We just published a report called The Connection Opportunity, which shows that Americans, even in these very divided, breaking times that you were talking about, really yearn to connect. And so I think a key skill that we need to do is to provide the opportunity to do that and to work on our skills. And if I may, Emily, I'm going to embarrass you a little bit, but I just read a book that's coming out soon, which is called Deep Listening, by a very promising writer who's here. And I just think that if everybody could read this, if schools could read this, if we could have like 5 hours of learning to listen for our kids, I have 3 kids, that would be huge progress, because that is a skill that we really need.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm interested to hear what people, sort of lessons, and really to pinpoint on the lessons that you think haven't already been mentioned that we need to bring into this collective discussion in terms of what's working, what the solutions are. Anybody want to contribute? There's a lady over here at the back.
Hi there, Mungi Ngomane. I'm South African, so I do a lot of work around Ubuntu, very connected to listening. And what I've realized a lot in the US context is, I always want people to feel safe in conversations, but what I'm realizing is less that people aren't safe, it's that they are confusing a lack of safety with like discomfort. And how am I gonna tell you, no, you are safe? How am I gonna, let you know when we have a short time to engage that you are safe? What you're feeling is just discomfort, and so you've lived a privileged life until this point. If you cannot handle this discomfort, it's trying to figure out how we move and get people sitting in discomfort.
That's such a beautiful point. And I found in my work with deep listening that people often fear that if they listen to somebody they disagree with, it indicates that they agree. It's a signal of agreement, and they fear they're going to be contaminated by these abhorrent ideas. And once you give them the kind of permission that it's okay, you don't have to change your mind, it's about understanding rather than necessarily about building consensus, then they're free to listen. And that's really exciting. Hi. You have a microphone over here.
Thank you. And building on what was just said about the safety piece, I also feel that having an understanding of what trauma does to us, which is it keeps a lens of danger active in our nervous system, and that's where that discomfort comes from. And so when we become aware that that's how this is being carried around, and we can actually remove that lens, we can become first of all, we can become aware of it, that can help make a really big difference. But so this piece around healing, from trauma, I feel that is such a necessary part of the work that we're doing, and it's so beautiful to see the examples that you're providing precisely of that. So
that's so important. And in fact, let me turn to the panel here, because I know both of you have really foregrounded in your work, and feel that it is absolutely pivotal. And Heela, this has become a real motivating for you right now. Is that right? Tell us about what you're doing in that space.
In terms of inner work?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think at the beginning I had a bit of hero complex. I think most of us have that, especially working in the humanitarian sector. Then later on, I got burned out, like working too much. Also, always sitting at the front line of humanitarian work and like hearing these stories. And then later on, I took therapy. I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and kind of like worked on my own time as well. Like, how do I manage this work as doesn't trigger you? Because if you're an enabler, facilitator, you need to work on yourself as well if you're working in peace building. And one thing I've realized that trauma doesn't stay in the past. It becomes a lens through how you see other people's as well. And that's really important because for me, that kind of shifted this. I needed to know like how much I can take on and how much I can give back to my community. And this is not something that I should be doing individually. Collective support and collective approach to this is really important. And finding other enablers, it's really important in order to work in peace building and long-term sustainability. And that's what I've learned as well throughout. And this is something I'm working all the time. Like I've listened to your panel yesterday. One of the panelists is that traumatized people build traumatized systems. You cannot build a system when the people are traumatized, especially those in the leadership positions. So if I'm in a leadership position, I need to make sure that I know how to handle my own trauma and my triggers in order to continue this work. And we can't build a system and institutions that are built by people who have been traumatized and not working any inner work. So that's really important that, yes, start with you, because peace cannot be just built externally. Obviously, it needs to be built internally as well, and it needs to be built individually at the same time collectively as well.
Thank you so much for being open and sharing with us. I think there's also research that when people are vulnerable, it builds trust. And that's something that's really powerful. So we're very grateful. But you're not only, doing work on yourself, you're actually developing an app called Laughter in Dari, English, Arabic, and Pashto. Tell us more.
So we did a lot of consultation in Afghanistan. Right now we're running workshop using art therapy, somatic therapy, and poetry, which is a very big thing in Afghanistan in terms of healing and sharing, being vulnerable and sharing pain and story through poetry. So we did about 40 to 50 community consultation in Afghanistan, and through that result, what we found out is that most people in Afghanistan, they need a digital solution, an app that can be accessible to everyone, but also there is no language barrier. So this app, which will be hopefully launched in July, we're working on it, that we're providing information about intergenerational trauma, which is really important. Somatic therapy, a directory of therapists that will be available. And the whole point of this app is like we need to provide mental health services to anyone who lives in conflict without any barriers, without any restriction. And that's what we're working on right now. And we will integrate AI into it as well, so people have more accessibility in terms of accessing mental health and healing. And we're gonna launch this in Palestine, Afghanistan, and South Sudan. So hopefully this is something, that's an initiative we're leading on, because digital solution is something we need to integrate in our peace building work.
So exciting. Can we just have an applause? That feels really meaningful, and I'm sure there may be people here who are interested in having conversations with you afterwards. So thank you so much.
Including me, let's bring it to Colombia.
That's fantastic. And tell me a bit about your work, because you're also an integral coach and you've integrated a lot of this internal work as a core part of your peace building. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I truly believe that bridging to others starts within. And if we don't embark in the inner development journey, we face the risk of connecting from fear, from judgment, from other spaces that don't allow it. So it's been a central part of our work all the time, especially because we began working exclusively with victims. So it really has played an important role. And I think it's important for you as a leader or facilitator, for your team, and for the people who are involved in your processes. Like Heela, I went through a burnout at a very early age, and that I would think it was like 20 years ago that invited me to embark in a deep, deep journey. And of course, many things have happened since then, but I'll focus in two things that has really helped me. Self-awareness, like knowing your own pains, your own weaknesses, your own trauma is really important. Like I never acknowledged that I was traumatized because I felt I didn't have the rights to be traumatized compared to what people in my country had faced. So becoming aware of that was really, really important, and understanding what happens to your nervous system and how you react and how you judge and how you fear and sometimes how you overwork as well. So it has been really important. I think it has helped me also to forgive. And you don't forgive for others, you forgive for yourself, to free yourself. And it has allowed me to be much more self-compassionate and to be more compassionate about others and to really hold these spaces for bridging and connection to happen. So as part of that process, I understood also to bring this to the center of our organization. And I think it's part of our culture. We really have embedded rituals, processes, ways of being to make sure that we bring our whole selves to the organization and that we're leading from a different space. Another thing that I discovered in my self-awareness process is that for many years I was serving from a space of guilt, of privilege, and it's very different when you serve from a space of love. And I was serving from guilt and fear. And I think I've shifted to serve from a space of love and connection. And I think that really transcends. And that's something that, as I said, we nurture in our organization. And therefore, we run leadership programs all across the country. We have directly trained 167,000 leaders who at the same time run their own initiatives, and it includes inner development processes, so they themselves run it in their community, so it has a large multiplying effect. And I'll bring in arts as another lesson and connecting to this as well. Arts in different level can play a really important role. My organization was co-founded by Juanes, a very famous Latin American artist, very committed to these issues as well. And he has used his music to bridge and connect. Like, his lyrics are so relevant to the reality of Colombia and the world. When we were about to go to war with Venezuela, he organized in 5 days a huge concert in the border in a bridge that connects both countries. It was a really beautiful moment. So at that level, it can shift narratives and create a sense of connection and belonging. But we use it as well in our workshops, because music, for example, and arts in general is a shared human language, and it allows us to use other intelligence. I think we're too much in our heads, and I love your statistics about that. I'm going to use them from now on, because I truly agree with that. And when we allow our body intelligence, our emotional intelligence, our collective intelligence, there's another opportunity to see beyond, to access wisdom, and not only your own cognitive intelligence.
That's so many beautiful thoughts. I mean, just imagine if the world's leaders were to go on doing some inner work. I mean, when you see what might be possible when you see what kind of behavior's been watching on TV. Let me turn to this lady over here. So good that you just kind of interrupted and put your hand up, by the way. We love that kind of disruptive behavior.
Well, you provide an excellent segue, because as I sit here listening to this incredible power of individual level change, I can't help thinking, okay, but how do you get that to the level of population level change, especially when the forces in media and in our political lives are so toxic, are so polarizing, are thriving on isolating people and separating people and othering people?
Yeah, that's such an important grounding question about being real and being realistic. Let's hear from Michelle for a moment. And any other thoughts on that big bloody challenge that you've identified here? And there's somebody here, so let's hear.
It emerges in me to in addition to that segue, I hear from a lot of leaders within our community that are searching for that bridge and are starting to adapt and change their own perceptions of others. And yet there's that fear of being seen or being judged by their own communities as capitulating. So I would love to hear from you about what is the role of the other communities, because it feels like it takes like one at a time, but how do we make it collective?
Yeah, that's a real challenge that kind of individual leaders feel the challenge of being seen as betraying their side. I think that's fantastic. There was a lady over here.
I just wanted to add to Kathy's question, which is how do we challenge this on a narrative scale, and especially when some of these activities are happening in digital spaces or through media, and when we're combating against algorithms that are actually driving people kind of into their separate corners and profiting off of it.
Yeah, that's also a good question. I know, Mathieu, you've done some work in that as well. In fact, shall we kick off with that and then have other broader thoughts around how to scale beyond, especially with leadership, to make a real moving of the dial? But let's take that digital question first.
Yes, I'll take the digital question. I also wanted to return to a couple of things that were said very briefly. So on the digital thing, I think, people ask, we've studied polarization, including we've studied the history of polarization, and the good news is polarization has always existed. It is not new. Many times, including very ancient times, have been very polarized. What is genuinely new and genuinely worrisome is tech, is social media, is algorithm. That is new, that has never happened in history, and that is really, really, really problematic. And if there's one issue that really is problematic, that is it. But I want to touch on the question that was asked before, but also return to your work, Emily, because if there's one difference, we work in Europe and the United States. If there's one thing that explains why the United States, or indeed Brazil, where we work with lots of people in this room, is more polarized, why is the US more polarized than Europe? It's public broadcasters. That's the one reason. There are many others, but public broadcasters is one. And Emily led an amazing series, which I'm sure you can still find.
I paid him loads of money.
If you're not an Emily Kasriel superfan, you will be after I finish talking. But she led this thing which basically showed that people, tens of millions of people, want to watch content that isn't about conflict and division, etc. Check out her stories. It's really, really amazing. I just wanted to touch briefly, Emily, if I may, on the point that was made by our friend from South Africa about discomfort, because I think that's super important. We're not here to say that everybody needs to agree. The contrary of bridging is not all agreeing, as my friend and a friend of many of yours, John Powell, I'm sure, says often. That is not the point. We're not here to agree. So I think a degree of discomfort is really important. It's okay. We need to be. So I just wanted to agree with what you were saying.
That feels so important. And I know that there are all sorts of really exciting initiatives in tech about tweaking algorithms and all sorts of new social media which are playing in these spaces. The challenge is scaling them, and the challenge is getting the big social media companies to do things which aren't necessarily brilliant for their bottom line, because we know that more polarized content is more seen, is more shared, is more liked, and attracts us, because on some level we are attracted to that which can save us. We're attracted to threats. We feel we need to brief ourselves, and that it's this other work, these other stories need to counter what we naturally have evolved to do to save us from tigers, and really there aren't real tigers anymore, and that's a huge, huge challenge of our times.
Emily, sorry, I forgot to mention one thing, sorry. In our polling, there is no other issue that gathers more cross-party, over the 80% line compromise, agreement among people than tech is very bad for us. This is a political winner. You can, in the US, in France, in Germany, in the UK, in the European Parliament, you can pass any law, you're going to get 80% of any voting bloc. So why politicians aren't doing it is a very good question, because the votes are there.
That is fascinating. In the UK, we're starting to move the legislation,
very close,
which feels really exciting. Yeah, wait for the mic. Thank you. It's coming, it's coming.
I just want to add something to that. There's something that we found that is a little bit related with discomfort, and also with the understanding that we have different understanding of the world. What I understand as a colonization, as a Latin America, is different than what someone in India understands, and different than someone in Bangladesh. So having that in mind is super important to understand that sometimes you just need to respect other people's point of view. It's not going to change. We're never going to agree. Probably we're not going to work together, but if I respect you, we can coexist, and have a peaceful community. But one of the things that we found listening our members, especially from the Global South is that for many of them, media has been, and I'm not talking about traditional media, I'm talking about social media, community media, radio, that has a lot of reach in the South, has been a way of understand other things that the world is seeing that are not necessarily true, understand others' way of living, and also understand how they have been seen. And there is a lot of requests to change narratives, because sometimes we make the mistake of have the conversation with the same people in the room. We don't listen to people from the communities. We use the narrative that we know, and it's not necessarily the narrative that they want to see and hear. So our message ends with 100 views, while other influencers have 52 million.
Yeah.
So
it's a good point. I want to go back to this topic, I think a really big one, about what we can do to stop, to not just work with individual communities, but to really move the dial on this, because it feels so, so important. I mean, that big question of scale, and I don't know if any of you want to address this question.
I think the role of education plays a really important part. In digital literacy, for example, so we all understand and recognize misinformation, biases, and echo chambers, and also social-emotional skills. I think they're still called soft skills, and I think they are the most important skills that we need for the next, or one of the most for the coming years and decades. Because our kids need to learn critical thinking, empathy, conflict resolution. So the role of education, I think, plays a critical role. And narrative shaping in general, I think journalism can play a very important role as well. Not only sharing constructive stories, but also sharing both parts. So we have the capacity to really understand and not have to go and search in right-wing or left-wing news media, but actually being able to understand different points of view and identifying shared issues, which there are many more than divides.
It's so important. I mean, education as a way of scaling and communication, and the acknowledgement that it is possible to have more than one perspective. I was in Japan, and I don't know if anyone's been to the rock garden in Kyoto, and there's 15 rocks in this garden, and there's a terrace, and it was built hundreds of years ago by a Buddhist monk. And 15's of sort of notion of perfection in Japanese culture. But from any point in the terrace, you can only see a limited number of rocks. You need other people's perspectives to see the whole picture. Yeah. And it was really powerful when I saw it there, and I think we can all acknowledge, especially when we feel self-indignantly that we are right, and I do that quite a lot, we are sure, and it's those moments we feel most emotional. It's most likely we're bringing other stuff to bear on the story that isn't really related, and that's a kind of, well, for me, is the alert that, whoa, something else is going on here, you need to listen, and that's so powerful.
Yes, I just want to add on that, because this is something I experience a lot, because I come from a global south, and when I attend conferences and stuff, usually this question comes a lot. It's like, okay, how do you bring the stories of people from that side of the world? Because a lot of people will have access to digital platform, but their stories never make it to here. The language barrier is there, the visa restriction, which is quite prominent, because I face a lot of visa discrimination. I can't come to most of these conferences unless I get an invite. These are practical barriers why we don't have voices from the global south. And when you talk about the perspective, yes, I growing up in Afghanistan and in war in a country, I'll see the world very differently comparing to someone who grew up in the Western country. And one of the things I experience is sometimes they romanticize our resilience. And this is something I try to emphasize a lot, that just because I come from a country, my resilience, my struggle is not something to be romanticized all the time. Inspiration is good, you get some inspiration, but then I want to acknowledge that most of the resilience that we had was never by choice. Resilience of an Afghan woman, a Palestinian woman, a Ukrainian woman, it shouldn't be romanticized. And when we know this, that yes, these people and the story they bring to these platforms are lived experiences, we need to acknowledge that first and give the voices to the victims. Sometimes when it's like I'm just talking to another expert in the same room, it's like they already know what the statistic is, they already know what the solutions are. We have the amount of resolution we're printing or drafting every year is insane, but there is no accountability, there is no implementation. That's what we're lacking. So when it comes to large-scale digital divide, how do we do that? To be honest, I still don't have the answer, because this needs to be done a lot of research. AI and algorithm is a very new concept to us these days. And this is something where we need to take individual responsibility and accountability. Armchair activism is one thing, but if you're doing armchair activism from your home, you need to be very responsible and activist, very responsible, and make sure you're using digital platform really wisely, because it's not just the community member, it's also us who needs to take accountability of what type of news we're spreading across our news channels and social media platforms.
It's a really, really good point. Thank you. Other thoughts from the floor on this big question? Because it feels so urgent right now. I'm really interested in other solutions that we need to address and things. Can we go to the guy at the back there first?
Relay race.
And they're keeping fit.
It's really sort of like a question for the whole panel. Listening to some of the comments, for example, the gentleman mentioned, Matthew mentioned sort of media is kind of one of the key reasons why American society is polarized. I want to extend that sort of a bit further and say whether anyone in the panel thinks that if you look at social media, it's kind of become the main way in which we consume and interact with each other. But for example, if you go through many of the Facebook groups, what I find is that a lot of the times social media has just made it easy for people to create a church of kind of their beliefs. So it's just bringing together people with similar views, not necessarily helping to kind of engage in debate and sort of compromise. Does anyone in the panel think that the growth in social media use as a way of exchanging information and communicating with each other kind of has made the work that many of the organizations here do more difficult by simply bringing together people with similar views, kind of enhancing those views and creating these separate groups who then kind of just shout across to the other group with similar beliefs? And if so, what can be done to bring back something that helps get people talking? Because I feel like, yes, social media has just made it difficult in the sense that you cannot, it's hard. You no longer need to come into debates with an open mind to listen to the other side. Rather, I feel most people just come with the standard talking points that you often hear in those groups in social media.
Yeah, such a good point. It's such a good point about these cocoons, which all of us, on some level, we find it easier to talk to people in our own little cocoons. What can we do to break out of them? Sorry, this lady over here. And just please keep them brief, because I want to get a lot of people have really good thoughts they want to contribute.
When we mentioned about giving voice to the people that are not seen,
point.
And what about also paying attention, deep listening to the silence, to the voice that are not heard, because very little people do get the chance to actually speak up. I'm from China, and I feel there's so little voice about that, although it's such a big thing. So, and then how do we listen to that?
It's so interesting. I'm just curious about China, because we don't hear about divisions. Is it just that they're repressed and we don't get to hear? What's going on about polarization in China?
I think that's a separate question.
Yeah, no, I'm just curious. It's a fair point. It's a fair point. But yeah, next time you come on this panel. Here, do you want to go to the lady next to you? You can pass the mic.
Thank you so much. It's very interesting. I think for me, what is missing a little bit from the conversation is the economic part of it, the financial aspect, because we live in a world where we live in a capitalistic world. And I think a lot of what we're talking about are sometimes very anti-capitalistic movements. I work in journalism, and there are so many people trying to create better things, and I think in general in all our professions regarding to this panel. But to make it worthwhile in money, I think that is something that we need to talk about.
It's a really good point, because we want to scale. We don't just want to have brilliant little ideas talking to, cozy peaceniks. We need to bring out and create scale, and money is so significant, and making things commercially viable as well. It's a really brilliant point.
So you all outlined some wonderful aspects of the work that you do that you think can be replicated across countries, do something together, harness faith and culture, human connection beyond professionalism. Do you think, or have you seen that being scaled at all to the online world in a meaningful way? Is it possible to do, especially given the commentary before about how more and more we're consuming passive creator-led content online, or we're in bubbles and silos?
Fascinating. I think let's just take a bit of pause and give these guys briefly a chance to respond to some of these questions. The challenge of echo chambers, giving voices to victims, making peace commercially viable, and scaling some of these initiatives in the online world as well. Have any of you got one you want to respond?
To the online point, we were forced to do it during the pandemic. We never expected to be able to do so, and we did it. And of course, it's more challenging. I think the setting and the environment is really important to be able to create the connections, but it's possible. We were successful with young people, especially. We didn't try it with...
What was it that you were doing? Can you share particularly so people might learn?
Okay, so it was, we call it a leadership training, but it's an excuse to bring very different kids to develop shared programs to solve specific problems in their communities, etc. So we brought young people from very diverse socioeconomic backgrounds, people who were affected by violence, people who had been members of gangs, and we went through a 9-month process through Zoom, and we managed to create somehow with creativity, using art, using silence, using meditation, using small groups, etc. And it was somehow successful. They managed to connect afterwards, and they still creating things together. And not only once, and we continue doing it online, so it was successful.
What's the scale? How many people were you able to bring together to take on such a program?
So our maximum amount of groups per cohort is 45 people.
Okay.
But we had several of that. We can have, I don't know, per year, maybe 500 online, I mean.
Mathieu, do you want to respond to any of the questions?
Yes, sure. I'll try a few, but it's great to see that this panel is. We're all on this panel, so that's great. Well done, because these are such interesting stories. So I'll just touch on 3 really, really simply. We've worked with governments in the places that we work to make connecting across divides, social cohesion, whatever you want to call it, the center of a political program or a government program. Because in a weird way, it's as if we have designed our lives online and off to not connect across lines of divide. I mean, if an alien landed in the United States today, it's like, okay, so you've designed social media, your schooling zoning system, your housing zoning system, your voting districts, so that people who are different never interact. This is very strange. So it can be turned around. And in Germany, the previous German government made social cohesion in places of contact, whether it's schools, hospitals, housing rules, even commercial zoning districts, to say, are you connecting people who are different? Because the less contact we have with intergroup contact, it's called, the less contact we have with people who are different, the more we start to have perception gaps and things like that. So at a meta level, it can be the center of government policy. More just on the point about business, we also work on business of the polarization and division as a business concern, and it is a business concern. It impacts your brand, it impacts your leadership, it impacts the value of your stock. Like, we've done work with business groups to do that, but it is a business concern. And so that makes it commercial, that there's a commercial element to that. And then your point about the importance of online, it's so important, and lots of people are doing great work, and I know you know them on the new digital public square, and that's not my area of expertise, but there's great people to do that. But my instinct is we should also really try to get people offline, like as much as possible, really. An hour spent offline is kind of a win for our kids, for us, for me. My screen time is terrible.
Thank you. Heela.
I have two solutions. This is something we've learned. The first thing, you were talking about the silenced voices, because first of all, it's also us. Sometimes we're the problem as well, because we made US the center of the world. There are issues happening around every country, but you need to be proactively active to know what is going on in other countries. Sometimes the main news media channels, they're all based in the US as well, obviously, so you will receive content mostly from those companies and those social media companies. In terms of giving the voices to the silence, it's our job to proactively search and see what is going on in other countries and what is your contribution. Second was involving the economy and thing. What we did in Afghanistan, just got one example, because after COVID, we had to switch online as well. And imagine switching online, do peace building in Afghanistan. It's not imaginable. People don't have access to electricity, internet, or anything. So when we switched online, one of the examples, we had a community consultation, and 5 of our members walked 1 hour from one district to another district to go to a mosque and get online because only the mosque had electricity. This is one example what people face in Afghanistan. So what we did, we reached out to private sector, the private companies, because they have a lot of money. We said, like, okay, we're doing this initiative. You have the social corporate responsibilities sector. Why can't you fund us to actually provide electricity to these community members so at least they can have electricity and get online? And they did. For us, when it talks about financing, it is evolving where the money is coming from as well. Sometimes government won't give you money. There's too much bureaucracy, and then there's too much paperwork. NGOs are also broke at the same time. They will not give you a lot of funding for long-term sustainability. Private sector is something we need to tab on as much as we can and get that funding and involve them as one of our key stakeholders when it comes to economy and financing these initiatives. So there's a lot of issues in terms of, obviously everything has its pros and cons. It depends on us how we're using social media at the same time. But I agree, making sure we make people come offline rather than online, but at the same time acknowledging that there's security risk to many people who in conflict zone to gather in one place as well. But then the online solution is a good solution for them, because we can't gather everyone in a conflict zone in one place. That then online solution is a better solution. I think it's context specific. Yeah. We need to make sure we do our research and implement it.
It is a really good point. And what's so exciting about online is that when I did this deep listening project with 1,000 people in 100 countries, biggest countries represented Malaysia, New Zealand, UK and Iran. And so all these people, because a mate of mine runs the Persian service, so she was able to recruit people by Telegram, were able to have these crossing divides conversation with each other when they sometimes had never ever spoken to somebody outside their country before. They were all English speakers, I should say. So online also can make things possible. And then on to your point, just the thought about the commercial aspect. I think a lot of companies are also struggling with intergenerational divides, because politics, intergeneration and climate often causing a lot of conflict. And I'm doing some work also with some corporates on that, work within their organizations and companies about learning to listen to each other, because at the moment there's that friction, and I think appealing to them because it makes better business sense. They can't operate unless they also deal, because of course companies, schools, societies, universities, they're all microcosms of societies, and if people aren't engaging and listening to each other, then they can't function well, and all sorts of disruptions can happen. Let's have some more points from the floor. There's so many of you. Look at that. Let's hear from this guy first.
I think she's been a really long time.
Oh, apologies. Thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. Go on. Yeah, go on. Go for it.
Rachel Parrish with Welcoming America, proud partner. You brought up social contact theory earlier, and one of the things that social contact theory says is we need to bring people together on equal footing for a sustained period of time. And I think one of the things we found in our own work that really challenges people is that equal footing piece. And what we're talking about there is power, imbalances of power, the structural barriers, language has come up, status, of course, being one of them. And when we live in really segregated communities and separated communities, all of those things are reinforced. And you started to talk a little bit about public policy. So I'm wondering, just in thinking about the structural barriers to bringing people together that you're confronting in your work, and what we might demand in public policy or advocate for in public policy, what should we be thinking about?
Yeah, and interested in your own perspectives in terms of what works in challenging some of those power differentials. What have you found?
Well, I think, for us, it's thinking about belonging. I mean, as John Powell defines belonging, being able to be represented in decision making. So, in the context of our work, it's, about bringing, for example, immigrant and non-immigrant communities together to find a shared sense of belonging and making sure that the barriers of language or culture, are very, there's an intention around the design of public spaces, an intention around the design of community decision-making, or even of designing, an arts and culture program, a program to break bread, where you've thought about these things ahead of time. It's a design question. But I would love to hear other examples and also how we can bake that into good policy.
Really great point. Thank you for raising it. The gentleman behind you. Yeah, you.
My question is about organized process of radicalization, because it is very interesting as radicalization never appear in our conversation about polarization and divided society. Yes, we have polarization. Yes, we have polarized society, but also we have very organized process of radicalization, at least in Brazil and the US. And this process come from different areas, come from of media, including media mainstream, coming from social media, obviously, coming from different churches in Brazil, actually, but in the US, the same thing. Different conservative churches. It's okay to be conservative and defense of conservative values, but many churches defend his conservative values, support several radical groups, including radical political groups. So how is possible grapple with this challenge that is organizing the process of radicalization?
I'm so glad that you made that point, because that is the authenticity of the kind of challenges that we're dealing with and the mainstreaming of a lot of these radical groups in social media, but even in mainstream media and in mainstream politics. So it's a fantastic challenge that you've raised. This lady over here.
Hi, my name is Anastasia Holoboff. We're from Women Enabled International. We advance the rights of women and gender diverse folks with disabilities globally. And my question is, for the panel, what advice do you have for engaging in these conversations that are, when the topic is inherent to a person's identity, such as their disability, and how do you do so with dignity for the community that is identity is being discussed and in a way that protects their mental health, as was related? And I think it is not only relevant because there's 1.3 billion of us, but it's also relevant for the example of the US and abortion conversations in the US, and as part of that bridging the divide. And I say this as a strongly pro-choice organization, but people with disabilities in that conversation about abortions are used by both sides of the issues as a manipulated part of the argument, and their identities are used to defend both sides of that position. And the people with the disabilities are not part of that conversation, in part because the way the community decision makings are structured is literally the room isn't accessible, or the language isn't accessible. But it's also because that's very uncomfortable, right? Like you're talking about someone's identity and right to live, and so that's very uncomfortable. And so, but we as people with disabilities have to be in those conversations. So my question is, how do we have those deeply uncomfortable but essential conversations.
Thank you so much. And it picks up on the uncomfortable point that somebody was making earlier, and how to have these conversations, both with people who are excluded traditionally, and also when that very essence of the conversation is central to the person's identity. Let's pick up one or two more final thoughts before we bring Sally at the back. Let's hear from you, and then hear from others who haven't yet spoken.
So I'm still thinking about the silos question, and one of the things that I've learned over the last few years is that research shows that if you are with people who are diverse and you're coming to a consensus as a group, you come to the middle. But if you're with people who think the same as you, you actually land in a place that's even further to the left or the right than the farthest person in that group. And it's made me very self-reflective about how I may be becoming more extreme in my thinking rather than pulling to the middle, because of the communities I live in, the conversations that I'm a part of, and the social media and media that I listen to. And so how do we sort of counter that in our nature so that we can pull towards the middle? Because we don't naturally find ourselves in those spaces.
Yeah, that's so brilliant. Thank you. And also an opportunity for all of us to reflect. So just want to hear of other people who haven't spoken before.
I would like to add about this.
Yeah, go on.
No, it's because I was...
And just briefly, because I'm aware of our time here.
When I'm from Brazil, so we had Bolsonaro, and now we have Trump in the United States. And I think they allowed to come out a lot of racism and homophobic, and a lot of people that were like, oh my goodness, I'm not gonna say this, I'm ashamed. And now I can do it, and I can talk it. And I had, I do a inner work, almost 20 years, therapy, ayahuasca, yoga, everything, but I don't know how to talk about with these people. And one day I was talking about one that was doing racism, homophobic, talking about this, and then I went, what? And then my sister said, you are so intolerant. And then I said, oh yes, I am. About this, I am intolerant. Because I think in this society, we cannot tolerate things like this. So how can we are not talking about, I prefer mountain or beach. We are talking about, okay, I cannot agree with you. You go to the mountain, I go to the beach. But it's about respect, homophobic words. So I don't know how to do it. I really don't know how to do it.
That's such an interesting question. And actually, my book I've addressed like, who should we never listen to? You know, it's my personal belief that we can all listen to individuals as long as they're not putting on social media or whatever, and try and understand why they believe what they do. But of course, it's not if it's going to be used or manipulated or anything. But I'm sure. But I'm just aware of time, so I want to give our panel an opportunity to reply to some of these, you know, concepts of radicalization and how we cope with that when the topic is central to our identity or people are excluded, the challenge of dealing with being, you know, the groupthink and how that makes us more extreme, and the challenge of that, you know, us becoming more extreme in that situation, and how we indeed, you know, how can we be tolerant to intolerance? So it's a hell of a big topics there. So quick thoughts from just as a kind of roundup, just to sort all that out in like a minute. Yeah, sure. Go on, Heela. Go on.
First thing is the radicalization. I don't know if you've seen the new Netflix show about adolescence. It's about a 13-year-old who stabs a girl because of the online content he's receiving online about misogyny and hatred towards women. And that's one example how even the younger generations are getting radicalized. And the UK government is now teaching misogyny, how to combat misogyny in the UK educational system. That was a solution. So I think raising awareness about it, but also creating content in a way that raise awareness. For example, everyone watches Netflix. If it's on Netflix, on these big platforms, we can also combat radicalization at that level as well, especially for the younger generation. And then the other question was the community. Sometimes I'm not tolerant as well. I lose patience as well. I'm quite young, so haven't built that same type of vibes yet. That yes, I'm like, I agree with everyone. I think Confirmation biases come sometimes from survival mode as well. If you're on survival mode, you want to be biased to certain group because it's like, okay, I feel safe now in this certain group, so that's not going to harm me anymore. So I'll agree with whatever opinion you have. I think one solution is coming out of that survival mode individually, and then we can be tolerant to other perspective and other opinions at the same time. When we know these people cannot harm us because we have the system that's protecting us, we have the community that's protecting us, we listen and we talk, and that's when we come back these type of issues. And then I think we can be more tolerant, because this is something I'm learning as well at the individual level.
That's so wise, the idea about being able to move out of survival mode, and it picks up on the trauma point that you, on your distracting phone, were making earlier. When we're in trauma mode, we're in no moment to engage, and the importance of having those systems and communities in order to support us to be able to move from survival into tolerance.
Maybe regarding the policy question, I think policies around inclusion of minorities in decision-making are really critical. In Colombia, we have advanced significantly, for instance, regarding young people or indigenous people, Afro-Colombian. The real challenge is in executing those policies. So really supporting not only the communities, but shifting the mindsets of decision makers to ensure that they have those real spaces is critical, and we have advanced significantly in that sense, but the challenge remains. I just wanted to touch very briefly on the role of silence. I really appreciated that, and I would add nature. And I think if we allow the voice of nature to be present, and if we advance our connection to nature, we would be more connected between us as well.
Beautiful point. Thank you very much.
Wow, so many great things to say. I just want to make 3 very quick points. The first one is to answer your question, Ronilso, and as I'm here also promoting other people, Ronilso is a wonderful scholar of evangelical churches in Brazil, and so if you ever are interested in evangelical churches in Brazil, he does great work, as do you, by the way. We met this week, but I know that you work with faith groups in the Amazon, but Ronilso does great work on radicalization on the community that you know very well, evangelical churches, but more broadly. I think it's really important to recognize that there are like profiteers of polarization and radicalization. They benefit from this financially, so calling them out online, in churches, on Fox News, just to say, you are benefiting from this. You are making a living doing this. You do not represent your broader communities. As you know much better than I do, Ranil, so evangelicals in Brazil overall are not radicalized, but there are some people who are moving them to be radicalized, and just calling them out, I think, is important. The second point, also in Brazil still, is a friendly rebuke to what you're saying, just please. But it's also really important to recognize that, like, the language that I may use, the terms that I may use, can be very off-putting to a Bolsonaro supporter. I'm not making an equivalence. It's unacceptable to say racist and homophobic things 100%, but we also have to realize that just how you are feeling, angry and you want to yell at those words, sometimes they feel that about what progressives say. And it's just, I think it's really important to recognize that happens, because it starts with that perception gap stuff that I was saying, like there's, understanding the other better. My final point is to say, I think that it's really important for all of us to make sort of contact, social cohesion, etc., to your point, also a great organization, Welcoming America, to center this work in public policy, to show that it'll be very hard to make progress on all the other things being discussed at the Skoll World Forum, whether it's climate, AI, race, democracy, if societies keep being more and more divided. It's just harder to make progress on any of these things. So if you center that and you show that it's a business win, it's a political win, then it's going to work.
Thank you so much. There's so much rich stuff. I'm just going to point out a few things that I wrote down, just to quickly sum up, about the importance of not falling into fake barriers, to say it's either breaking or bridging, but understanding what's in between, looking at all our own perception gaps and that which is also outside, showing the shared goal, working with people together about their shared humanity, human conditions beyond the label, And your work about paramilitaries, what changed was you saw them as victims as well as perpetrators, and that gave opportunities to heal together, moving from what's possible, from what's missing to what's possible, about bridging cultural and religious and all those terms that you use to bring food, to bring people together, and acknowledging the trauma. Unless we do so, we're not able to move forward. How to feel safe even when we feel uncomfortable, and how trauma keeps us with that lens of danger, and what we can do, our own internal work, to try and reduce that, and the importance in that space of self-awareness. Because if we don't have self-awareness, we're in no place to do all the important work that you just summed up there, and the critical importance of this crossing divides and contact together, because we cannot move, we need to move from a space of guilt and fear to a space of love and compassion that you said so beautifully, and how our body and nature can be such a beautiful source of intelligence and community and compassion. But the good news is that polarization has always existed, but of course now with algorithms and AI, it's like been tweaked up so much, and what we need to do about that. But I didn't know about Germany and how Germany had a policy of education, housing, business, bringing people together. And what an example to try and, for us in our own countries, to try and see what our countries can do in the same way. And the importance of education and critical thinking and empathy and the different narratives that we tell ourselves, and how important is that. I've got more stuff, but I can see I've reached zero, so I'm just, I will leave it there. But huge, huge thanks to our panel here. Woo!